The cafe that time forgot. It started with the rain, thick droplets drumming against the cobblestones, the rhythm steady and hypnotic. I had just ducked into a narrow alley of Rue du Soleil, shaking the water from my coat. The streetlights flickered like nervous fireflies, their glow reflecting in the puddles pooling along the uneven ground. I hadn't planned to stop, but the sign caught my eye. Vie Suspendue, painted in faded gold letters across a wooden plaque. Beneath it, a small door with chipped green paint seemed to beckon. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mingled with a faint trace of white tobacco, warm and earthy, cutting through the damp night air. Without thinking, I stepped inside. The cafe was unlike any I'd seen before. A chandelier of amber glass cast a soft light over the room, illuminating mismatched furniture that looked as though it had been plucked from a dozen different eras. Velvet armchairs sat alongside wrought iron tables. Antique clocks ticked softly from every wall, each one set to a different time. The air smelled of cinnamon and vanilla, undercut by the sharper scent of burnt wood from the crackling fireplace at the far end. A soft jazz tune hummed in the background, played on a gramophone that looked older than my grandmother's wedding ring. Behind the counter stood an older man, his white hair slicked back neatly. His eyes, sharp and blue, met mine as he polished a porcelain cup. "You made it," he said, his voice calm and steady, as though he had been waiting for me. I paused. "Made it where?" "To the moment," he said cryptically, placing the cup down with a faint clink. "Would you like a seat by the window, or perhaps something more private?" "I'm not sure I'm staying," I said, though even as I said it I felt the warmth of the room tugging at me, an invisible thread pulling me toward one of the armchairs. He didn't reply, just nodded toward the table nearest the fireplace. I hesitated, but eventually I sat, sinking into the plush chair, as though it had been made for me. A young woman approached, her dark hair tied back in a scarf. She carried a tray with a steaming cup of coffee, and a slice of something that looked suspiciously like my grandmother's apple tart. "I didn't order," I started, but she smiled, placing the tray in front of me. "Not yet," she said softly, her accent faintly Italian. "But you will." I frowned, but took a sip of the coffee. It was rich, with a subtle hint of a hazelnut, warming me instantly. The tart was just as I remembered from childhood, the cinnamon sugar crust crumbling perfectly under my fork. "How?" I started to ask, but the woman had already slipped away, vanishing behind a velvet curtain. The cafe was busier than I had realized. A man in a pinstripe suit read a newspaper dated July 18, 1929. Two women in 1950s dresses whispered over a plate of macarons, their laughter soft but melodic. A teenager in a Nirvana t-shirt flipped through a book with yellowed pages. None of them seemed to notice each other. I leaned forward, trying to catch the old man's attention. "Is this some kind of theme?" I asked, gesturing around the room. He smiled faintly, wiping the counter again. "You could say that." "Then how do you explain this?" I gestured toward the newspaper the man was reading, which seemed impossibly pristine despite its age. The old man's gaze didn't waver. "Time isn't as rigid as you think," he said. "Here it bends, folds even." I laughed, though uneasily. "So this is a magic cafe?" "Not magic," he replied. "Just forgotten." I finished the last bite of the tart, savoring the blend of cinnamon and warm apples and drained the final sip of coffee. The room seemed to hum softly around me, the clocks ticking in a gentle rhythm that matched my breath. For the first time in what felt like ages, I felt deeply at ease, as though the weight of the world had been lifted, if only for a little while. I thanked the old man at the counter. His quiet smile, a reflection of the calm settling in my chest. The one last glance around the cafe, at the velvet armchairs, the golden chandelier, and the fireplace's flickering light, I stepped outside. The rain had stopped, and the air outside smelled fresh, like wet earth and ozone. But the street was unfamiliar. The cobblestones were gone, replaced with smooth asphalt. The buildings had shifted, newer, sleeker, and eerily quiet. I turned back to the cafe, but the door was no longer green. The sign above read Le Soleil Noir, and the windows were dark. The cafe had vanished, replaced by what looked like a boutique clothing store. My heart raced. A woman walking by stopped when she saw my expression. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice kind but concerned. I gestured to the boutique. "What happened to the cafe? La Vie Suspendue?" Her brow furrowed. "The cafe? There hasn't been a cafe here for years." "But I was just inside," I insisted. She gave me a puzzled look before shaking her head. "Maybe you've had too much coffee tonight." I stood there for what felt like hours, staring at the storefront, hoping the green door would reappear. It didn't, but as I reached into my coat pocket, I felt something unexpected. A matchbook with the cafe's name embossed on the front. Inside, a handwritten note read, "The moment is always here, waiting for you to find it again." I still don't know what happened that night, but every now and then, when the rain begins to fall, I catch the faintest whiff of cinnamon and vanilla in the air, and I wonder if I'll ever find my way back.